All right, so it's like you have if you're in a theater production, you have the early matinee show. I guess that's what we have with Brittany Martinez and Tal Esslig, and then we have the prime time right here with Rob Stutzman and Blake Zanti.
Be sure to
Uh,
tell that. Yeah.
Absolutely, we'll mention that to him. He knows he already got. If you watch the interview from before, he already got a compliment. I asked him for the mustache authority as it relates to Chad Bianco, so I figured he was good to talk on that. So we have these four governor candidates that Eyewitness News has interviewed. We're hoping to interview as many that we can coming through. We booked a few others through the end of this month and then through June, just wanting to get a head start because there's so much intrigue in this position. There's so much looks like a feels like a change no matter who gets elected, as far as Newsom being term limited and perhaps a shift from a very currently Sacramento driven governor's seat. I think just to start things off, Rob, what do you think or what do you expect to see in this election? Is that a good assessment that no matter who it ends up being, it's going to be a dramatic shift from what's currently there?
Well, it could be a dramatic shift. I think the dynamics and the concern about affordability and the lack of progress, in fact, maybe even how things have gotten worse on the affordability front under Newsom, sets this up for a change type of candidate, an outsider. Now, most of the Democrats that are running are former elected legislators or statewide officials. It's a lot of more of the same. They all kind of sound like they're running for Newsom's third term. But someone that can sound different from them, I think, has a real opportunity. And right now in the Democrat field, I think that would be Antonio Villaraigosa, who you've interviewed. And the fact that he's actually been through the Central Valley and has sat with you, I think, says something on how he's trying to be different. He, of course, is he's a longtime career politician, former mayor of Los Angeles, former Speaker of the Assembly, but he's been out of Sacramento now for over a decade. And so you really can't blame him for much of the way things are right now. So he has the opportunity to come in and say, look, I've got experience. I know what can work. I can fix this. These guys have broken it. And it's time for someone who, as Jerry Brown used to say when he ran for his third term last decade, the mind of an outsider with the experience of an insider. That could be Villaraigosa in the current field.
Yeah, and Blake, I have a feeling too with him perhaps pointing to those his record of being somebody in charge of leadership in Sacramento and maybe during a time of more positive feelings towards the state capital, whether there has been that at all, but it's definitely better than probably what it is right now. What are your thoughts on him being somebody who can also poll voters from the Republican wing as well, if there's not a quote unquote strong Republican candidate? His appeals to come to Bakersfield, talk about gas and oil as transition as not necessarily transitional fuel, but one that we need right now at this particular moment. And his going back on Fox News, I remember back in 2021 saying we got to get businesses open. What does that message say, as opposed to maybe people that are trying to run maybe a little bit more from the right, and of course those that are still sticking to perhaps at least if not necessarily the policy of Gavin Newsom, the general idea of progressivism and liberalism in California.
Well, certainly, Antonio Villaraigosa is someone who has deep connections in the Valley, even though he's been out of state politics out of Sacramento politics for a while. Folks I talk to here on the ground still keep in touch with him, still seem to know him. And so he does a really good job at maintaining those relationships. So I think that's key for him in understanding really the issues that are important to voters. I've said this before, the Central Valley is really a litmus test for the rest of the state. I mean, there are a lot of issues that are sort of front and center here, like affordability, like homelessness, like water. And these are things that voters are very focused on. I think even though we do have a Democratic supermajority in the state, certainly California voters are moving to be more issues based when it comes to elections. So Villaraigosa, if he can, appeal to that sort of, issues based, I guess, electorate, especially given the recent wildfire issues, insurance issues that were just reported on today, about insurance rates going up. I think these are things that are on top of mind for California voters. And if he can appeal to those issues, he certainly has a really good shot to sort of run as maybe someone who was once a part of the establishment, but is sort of running from the outside of the Democratic establishment right now, if you will.
I think for you, Blake, it seems like you're perhaps the perfect person to have on because when we're thinking about, okay, who's that perfect candidate? or perfect person to talk to when it comes to these young voters out there, these people that are just getting interested in politics, whose first election was maybe the 24 election, if not now the 26 election. What are they saying in your classes? What's your pulse on the ground there as far as what they're looking for their next governor? Or are they not even thinking maybe that far ahead? Maybe they're thinking about the issues of the day.
Yeah, well, the students that we interface with are certainly a lot more civically engaged than maybe the normal college student. So I'll throw that out there. But just from an anecdotal standpoint, the things that are top of mind for students that we hear about are cost of living and the economy. I mean, it goes back to that old saying, "It's the economy, stupid." I think students who are looking at the job market right now and are trying to figure out where they're going to go after graduation, that's their biggest concern. Is there a job out there for them that matches up with their skill set that they just took out a big fat loan for their college education? So I think that's a big deal. Also, we also have to think about young people who are not going to college. They're opting to go into the trades, or they're opting to maybe get their associate's degree and enter a different industry sector. So I think that those are things that also stick out, and I think need to be considered as well. Is our economy really working for that demographic of young voters? And I think typically I will say obviously young people don't vote as in strong numbers, so I don't know how much of an impact it'll make with regards to other sectors of the electorate. But it is certainly top of mind for a lot of young students that we interface with on a day-to-day basis.
And then, Rob, for you, when you hear that about these younger voters, what type of candidate do you think makes the best sense for someone, or would make the best strategy to kind of go after those younger voters to get them interested? Because while 2024, I'm sure we're going to have interest with the fact that it's going to be a new governor anyway, it is a midterm for the rest of the country. And you might not see the same amount of people as president because so many people maybe grow up with the idea that president's the most important position to go for and vote for. How do you target those young voters that are maybe feeling a little dismayed right now, especially those that are looking for a job coming out of college or coming out of a trade school or high school?
Well, if they're in the workforce, I think Blake identified the issue and its affordability. So the way to think about, I think, these younger voters is to think about of where they are economically, socioeconomically in society, and they're starting out. So they are more impacted than, say, their parents, in most cases, by the high cost of housing, whether it's rent or the dream of trying to buy a home or what a mortgage would cost them, but also things like energy bills. I have young adult children, and they are their jaws drop at what their energy bills are in their apartments. So is all these cost of living issues that we hear about, I think, have a heavy impact on these young voters that are entering the workforce, maybe a little different for college students. But once they're out on their own, having to pay for the roof over their head and food every day and the energy it requires to come and go to a job and to keep a house warm or cool. Yeah, I think someone talking about economics and making life more affordable in California is going to be who stands out to them.
Somebody who's been talking about economics and talked with us last week is Steve Hilden, and he's done something that I think is quite effectual, is that he's been going on social media. He has these conversations with different people. He went back to Stanford, where he used to teach, and he had some conversations with people there, not really flaunting the whole Republican aspect of his campaign and the Make America or Make California Golden Again aspect of it. It's interesting to watch those conversations, but then I've also attended his rally, and it's filled with the Trump hats. And his opening announcement, he had quotes from, or he had support from Vivek Ramaswamy and Charlie Kirk, which was a great endorsement if you're running perhaps in, Oklahoma and Nebraska. Does that work for, the state, for California? Can you have those endorsements when it comes time down to the top two, assuming he can get top two, and his opponent, who is likely going to be a Democrat, says, well, look at this, and look at who you're associated with, and just everything attached to the Trump administration? Rob, your thoughts?
Well, look, we have open primaries in California, meaning the top two advance, as we know. We've had this now for quite a while. However, Hilton, Bianco, and the other Republican are going to be running in the primary like it's a closed primary. There's only one ticket, if any tickets, for a Republican out of that primary. And so it's going to feel like primary politics until we get past next June. So Yes, if Hilton were to get a ticket punched and gets into the general election against a Democrat, I don't think you'll see the rallies kicking off anymore with MAGA world acolytes.
The Make California Golden Again is it's catchy. He's got the yellow. And I credit to his team. A lot of people in that building had yellow on when I went to it last week at
Uh,
Hodel's Country
oh,
Dining.
I think he's a good candidate. He's going to run a good campaign,
Yeah.
and Trump's endorsement, of course, is going to be desperately sought by him and the sheriff.
Yeah, and we had the sheriff on yesterday. I asked him point blank. I told him, I said, it seems like Steve Hilton's running affordability. You're running on the Prop 36 aspect, and people are familiarized with you based on how much you appeared on media to promote Prop 36 in public safety. I asked him what separates the two of you as candidates. His first word he said, one word sentence, was ability. And then he went on to talk about the differences and about TV commentators running for office and all that stuff. I made some joke about, how many TV commentators does it take to change the light bulb? Just one. They need a teleprompter. Great stuff. Great material. Anyway, back to the focus here. Uh, that's kind of the big question, right? This for Steve Hilton is going to be he's a policy guy, policy in the UK. Does that translate well, Blake, for you when you hear that it sounds like the Chad Bianco team and Chad Bianco himself are going to go on that lane of I'm going to talk about what I can actually do in California. Here's something that I've done in this state, and here's something that I know about the state being somebody in law enforcement for this long of a period of time.
Yeah, well, certainly, I think in the last election, California voters were pretty loud and clear on Prop 36. They wanted to see some reforms to our criminal justice laws and our criminal justice system here in the state. So I think, that gives the sheriff an advantage in terms of on his ballot designation. When it comes to voters bubbling in who they're going to vote for, he's going to be listed as a county sheriff. And that goes a long way. You see that all up and down the ticket in local elections. And, when a county sheriff runs for office, it's something that sticks out because people like that ballot designation. They like that brand. I think, that it is something that I think he can point to that is tangible that he worked on. I think, going back to of which Republican is going to be able to position themselves as the strongest candidate, it's really going to come down to the issues. I firmly believe that. I don't, you know, trying to position for Trump's endorsement may help in the short term and giving them a boost, but certainly will not help them in the general election. So I think the smart Republican candidate is going to stick to an issues-based platform, and really try to appeal to voters either using Prop 36 or using cost of living. I think at this point, the sheriff has a strong case to make, but certainly Mr. Hilton has a strong media presence as well. He's been up and down the state. He comes into the Valley pretty often. I see him popping in here to Fresno all the time. So it's gonna be close. That's for sure.
And Rob, I think something interesting with Steve as well is that, I asked Chad Bianco about Steve's plan, which is the $100,000, first $100,000 on your that you receive from income, not taxed. After that, it gets taxed, which is an interesting plan. I brought that up to Chad Bianco and just trying to figuring out what he's kind of looking at for policy as well. And he said pretty much, everyone knows that there's an affordability issue in the state of California. That's not the top issue, or it's such a top issue to the fact that, it doesn't even need to be discussed because it's already well known. What is the best route for a candidate who is a Republican to pick? What's the best lane to go for and say, what, this is what I need to run on? And perhaps as we can maybe lead into this conversation as well, that goes back to an Antonio Villaraigosa who can win Republican votes and someone we haven't mentioned yet in Rick Caruso too.
So look, I look at a lot of polling constantly, both public and private polling, and affordability, cost of living is the issue in California. After that does come crime. There's no question about that. I think the sheriff, I agree with Blake's assessment that ballot designation for Republican primary voters is fine. It's really powerful. However, governor's races become high information races, even with Republicans that may be underfunded. And, Bianco is going to have to expand beyond just the fact that he carries a gun and wears a badge. He's going to have some economic policies. I find it interesting what you described as him basically dodging the question that's relative to the number one issue on people's minds, especially Republicans, which is affordability. So long way to go in this campaign, but he's going to have to broaden himself beyond just being the sheriff. And at the same time, Hilton, I mean, Hilton's from another country. He has an accent. His experience in government is in the UK. There's something to overcome there for him on making him a bit more of a Californian, to identify a bit more of a Californian than say the sheriff might have the advantage.
Says the guy who worked with Governor Schwarzenegger there, you know?
Well, when you're the most famous guy in the world next to the Pope, it helps. I will say this about Hilton. If you go with the theory that voters like to choose the opposite of what they've had, a short, bald guy might be exactly what they're looking for after Gavin Newsom.
And I guess if you go based on that assessment, you had you had the bald governor with Jerry Brown, and then you had the governor with hair, then you go back to the bald.
We're back. Arnold bald, Gavin's hair. We're trending back to bald.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think the big issue too will be I'll go to Blake with you on this. Is there a lane for Rick Caruso to run in this race? A lot of his policy that we tend to see from him and a lot of his substance, what we see on social media, he posts so much on social media, he's going to do something, just whether it's the mayor or the governor's race. A lot of it still does seem very Los Angeles centric. His criticisms then seem to be of governor leadership and the way that the state spends money, but at the same time, still very LA centric. He has not supported the recall. Should there still continue to be the effort to recall Mayor Karen Bass, who was his opponent in 2022. And again, I go back to the question that I keep, summarizing, contextualizing. Is there a lane for Rick Caruso to run in this race?
I mean, there potentially is on the wildfire issue. I think, he's been pretty well known for being associated with that issue and is, well known because of the LA mayor's race. But the race is getting crowded. And I think the one unknown that still is circling above everyone's heads that, no one quite wants to talk about, but at the same time is still being speculated in the media is, does Vice President Harris jump in? So that could clear the field very quickly in terms of if Caruso has a lane or not. It may not even matter if we see Vice President Harris get in the race and clear the field pretty quickly. I think you might see some other folks like Antonio Villaraigosa still stay in the race. But it's getting crowded for Democrats already. So if there are folks who are going to jump into the race, they're going to really have to calculate where they're going to spend their money because there are so many media markets in California that are some of the most expensive in the country, and they're really going to have to do the math on what's their game plan, what issues are they going to campaign on, and what's top of mind for voters. And as Rob just astutely pointed out, affordability is number one.
Yeah, I think to put a bow on it too, the big question for Katie Porter is someone who maybe seems to be that second or third most popular Democrat is it going to be deja vu? Unfortunately, if you're a Katie Porter supporter, because she has the possibility of maybe being that number third, that bronze medalist again, if the Harris campaign or other people prop up a Republican that can finish top two and avoid what would be a more competitive D versus D. That said. In the past, Kamala Harris did in that 2016 Senate campaign run against the Democrat in that top two and won there. So maybe that shows that obviously a lot's happened since then, but she has the ability to win those types of races. And of course, the winning resume of doing those statewide successes has to mean something, even though if the reputation perhaps as far as a whole or that net unfavorability is still high. Rob, I want to close with one final thing too. As far as maybe where Democrats are maybe looking to avoid in situations they're trying to avoid, which was this AB 379 in the state legislature. This seemed to be a situation that should be open and closed as far as many people are concerned. It was across the aisle, bipartisan issue. Leadership amongst the Senate, or excuse me, leadership amongst Democrats had suggested, well, maybe not. It seemed to be favoring a backroom deal to perhaps the will of the legislature and perhaps, as some legislators would point out, will of the voters. Are these situations that Democrats are going to want to avoid to look their best come not only the state legislature races, but then also congressional races in 26, and if they want to push forward as strong a candidate as they can for governor in 2026 as well?
Yeah, you would think the Democrats would want to stop shooting themselves in the foot repeatedly on these types of issues. But in California, they have such massive majorities. It's like it doesn't matter. I like to point out that I think Democrats, legislative Democrats specifically, have become very bad at politics because it doesn't matter. It hasn't mattered. But they got to be careful because it could matter quickly. These things could change quickly for them if they continue to mismanage issues about, whether or not a 17 or 18-year-old that's trafficked for sex, that should be a felony or not, is what this issue was about. So, uh, does it affect congressional races? I don't think so. I think that'll largely be a referendum on the Trump administration or not. Could it affect the governor's race? Well, it's elevating issues for the governor's race. This is why you see Newsom step into these things, so he's not associated with these really colossal fumbles that are happening in the legislature by the Democratic leadership.
And then Blake, completely opposite state that I was in, both size and then politically, it was a Republican supermajority in Wyoming that I used to live in and report from. And what was interesting was they didn't necessarily lose seats as far as a majority was concerned, but there were a number of successful primaries to oust incumbents. And when you have issues like this, is that more of a possibility, I guess, than saying that there's going to be some unprecedented red wave in California when you look at maybe how some of the people in the legislature voted on this?
Yeah, I think it opens the door for, a primary challenger on the Democratic side. I think, if even in these safe Dem seats, what folks forget about is that there's always another Democrat who is looking to, potentially oust the incumbent. And so this is free ammunition. If there's a Democrat who maybe is a little bit more moderate, or if there's a Democrat even farther to the left, this is perfect fodder for them to be able to blast their opponent and launch a primary challenge to be able to take that legislative seat. So it's I'm sure it may come up in this election. I also think we're still in 2025, that not even deep into the summer of 2025. So you're going to have to spend money to remind voters about AB 379 and, oh, what was that bill about? And it's one of the 2,300 bills that were introduced in the legislature. So certainly an important issue and a very serious issue, but will voters remember it in a year when it comes to the primary election in June of 26? I'm not sure. That's yet to be seen.
My experience with it was in Wyoming, you had a large group of voters that were so upset right from the start of the year with Liz Cheney for voting to oust Donald Trump. And it wasn't just in that House race, it was across the state legislature. And you saw so many of the people that had been serving in the state legislature for so long ousted, and those that barely survived were knocked out in the 2024 races. I think that'll be fascinating kind of to watch as far as California is concerned, and to see if there's a similar pattern with a completely different size state, but an issue or a series of issues, perhaps, as Blake, as you noted there, that needs to happen if they can keep tying things back to the legislature, if they build up brick by brick on things like fuel standards, different types of affordability, different types of other pieces of legislation, perhaps even for people that have been campaigning on the trans athletes in sports. What's going on right now, too, with elderly parole. I know that there's a bunch of pushback there as more of these cases kind of come back to the Central Valley, and more people are seeing these individuals who have both either murdered, had committed heinous sexual assaults, be released from prison, maybe uh, 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 going along with what the parole board had said, but whether or not the parole board should have been making a decision at the time of when they had. Should it have been at the age of 50 years old? Should it have been at 6 years old? Should these crimes be eligible for parole? These are the types of issues that were passed in 2020 that are maybe now having a little bit of a beatback. And of course, uh, what was that number one issue this past election, as far as the state was concerned, was Prop 36. And we saw how the state voted overwhelmingly in favor of that, all 58 counties in California. So after that long summary, anyone want to end with anything else, or did I encapsulate as much as I could? I did it.
I
All
think
right.
Got it.
I think you did it. Yeah, you
Okay.
covered it well.
Great. All right. Well, I try to be as all-encompassing as I can, and then hopefully I'm factually correct. Most of the time I am. One thing I'm for sure about is by the time this gets published, so are our interviews with Chad Bianco, with Steve Hilton, with lesser known Republican there, Brandon Jones, who was still a great interview. Encourage people to watch that as well as the one with Antonio Villaraigosa. Just giving you all four people that we've talked to so far. Hopefully, we have a couple another few candidates coming in the next few weeks. Be able to watch all that as well. Thank you both so much for coming in.
You bet. Well.